So hello everyone, my name is Winoka Yepa. I am Diné, originally from Sherbrooke, New Mexico, but currently reside in Santa Fe, which is on the traditional homeland of the Tewa people, also known as Ogepoke. And I am the Senior Museum Education Manager at the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts. I would like to welcome all of you to our social engagement artist talk with Anna Tsouhlarakis. Just so everyone knows, this is a pre-recorded artist talk. So if you do have questions for the artist, please do leave them in the comments and I will make sure to forward those along to Anna. With that, Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Anna Tsouhlarakis, and I'm Navajo Creek and Greek. I was born in Lawrence, Kansas, and grew up between Kansas and New Mexico. And my family's from Standing Rock on the Navajo Reservation in New Mexico. I currently reside in Boulder, Colorado, the traditional homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute. And I'm an assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder.
Awesome, thank you, Anna. And so what we'll do today is that Anna will share a little bit more about her work, and then we'll go into questions after that. So Anna.
Thanks. All right, so let's get going here. So this is a group of slides pretty much showing the trajectory of my work when I started kind of becoming more of a professional artist in college and into graduate school and after. So about the past 20, almost 25 years. This is a photo that I always start my slides with. This is where my family's from. This is Standing Rock, out north of Gallup, about 45 minutes and west of Crown Point, New Mexico. So when I went to Dartmouth College, I was really exposed to a lot of Native arts. My dad's a traditional jeweler. And so I grew up going to different art markets like Santa Fe Indian Market, Herd Market, a lot of markets that used to happen in Tulsa and Kansas City and Denver and different places. And so I was really, interested in the way that artists were working and using a lot of different materials. And to me, that was kind of the norm of the way that Native artists work. And once I went to college, I started learning a lot about different trajectories of art within different disciplines and different art histories. So I started seeing work of, African-American artists, of Latin American artists, of Asian American artists, and seeing the way the artists of our time were working in those trajectories and learning about new materials and seeing how those were utilized, in performance and installation art, in video art, in these ways that I hadn't ever really seen a whole lot of Native artists working. And I became really interested in that. And I realized that once I started kind of making, dipping my toe in installation and performance, that was really the language that I wanted to speak through. So this was a piece that was in my senior thesis show. It's called Navajo Baby Blanket, and it's made out of fabric, baby blanket fabric, and flattened beer cans with safety pins. And it's about 3 feet by about 4 feet. And during my time in college, I was a double major in Native American Studies and Studio Art. So I was always looking, learning a lot about Native American history, different issues that were going on around Indian country. And I was really interested in, became more interested and learned about the photos of Edward Curtis. And I'd see a lot of the imagery and always kind of try to make connections with what I was seeing and in relation to kind of our life as like a Native community of students in New Hampshire. And one thing that I always thought about was how nomadic we had become. And so I was reflecting back on one of the photos of Edward Curtis where there's a person on horseback with a travois behind them. And there's, different photos of dogs with the travois behind them. And so I decided to make a travois that fit me. And I used my own backpack straps and all these found materials just from my dorm room to construct this piece. And it was this piece that I created and I had in the gallery, and, was kind of suggested, why don't I actually utilize it? And it's funny to me now in retrospect, thinking about creating something that was meant to fit me exactly. But when I was doing that, I never actually thought of utilizing it. And so I decided to give it a try. And so this ended up becoming my first performance piece. So I went throughout the town of Hanover with my travois, and I was nervous. I'm a brown girl in a very white town. And so I decided to use the license plate from my car on the travois, because I figured it would somehow legalize and legitimize what I was doing a bit. And so you can see a lot of different things from my room, piece of luggage, some blankets, some pillows, and I used a lot of duct tape to kind of bind it together with those bungee cords to kind of hold it all together. So these are some pieces there, some photos. This is a sculpture I created in graduate school. Again, and I think it just also came down to the fact that I didn't have a lot of money to buy different things, but I would rummage a lot through dumpsters and kind of old bins that I found around campus to utilize to start making things. And I started thinking a lot about the creation of narrative, of myth, legend, those types of things. And I wanted to do kind of create my own. And so I thought I would create this futuristic myth that went along with this rocket ship that I built, which is a working rocket ship. So during this, the presentation of this piece, I read text and showed my fellow students how it was utilized. So what I read was this: when the natural resources of Earth start becoming scarce, many people will look towards the option of leaving this planet in hopes of finding another planet that will sustain life. While most people will be in the fancy, sophisticated NASA-type space shuttles, there will be people such as Indians who cannot afford such luxury and will have to build their own ships. These less complicated rocket ships will not be able to take off on their own and will have chains that hook onto the larger rocket ships. But one thing each of those shoddy rocket ships will have is an escape hatch in the floor. All of the larger spaceships begin their countdown to take off. All the Indians will be slipping out of their escape hatches. The Indians will be putting their feet on the ground while everyone else is on their way out of here. So after I read this, I opened the door, went up into the rocket ship, opened the door, and pulled up. There was some artificial turf inside, and there was a trap door hatch where you can slip out the bottom. So when I say it's a working rocket ship, it's built to do kind of exactly what is talked about in the narrative, and it can hold up to 5 adults. So it's fairly sturdy, which is nice.
What is it made out of?
It's made out of wood, metal, aluminum, plexiglass, all different types of wood, just basically anything I could find, like I said, in dumpsters or just kind of laying around. And this is an interior shot. Being all the way out in Connecticut, I was pretty homesick a lot. And so I made kind of decorated the inside of the rocket ship with Southwest kind of colors and patterns. After graduate school, I went to Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. And during my time there, I did a lot of different projects, but kind of the biggest piece that came out of this was a video called Let's Dance. It was filmed in 2002, but finished editing in 2004. And it's a 15-minute video where I dance with 30 different people or groups of people over the span of 30 days. And so each of the pieces of video are about 30 seconds long. And this piece was, I think, really significant to me because I was, as kind of a Native person growing up in the US, I was in different dance troupes and performance groups, and I danced at powwows. And there was always this idea of like the native, even when I was really young, of being the educator of the teacher. Ironically, I grew up to be a teacher, but um, but even before that, it was kind of this thing that was placed on me, and I feel like it's placed on a lot of us to be the educator. And so for this video, I was interested in learning dances from other people, just any dance that they considered a dance. And I say that because there was in one of the clips, a woman is teaching me Tai Chi, because in her kind of thinking, that was a dance. And this is me doing the bump with Whitfield Laval. And all the Jewish women that were at the program taught me the hora, which I think is a Jewish wedding dance. And so they put me up on a chair and hoisted me up, which was kind of nerve-wracking, but it was really fun. And so it was a really, I think I enjoyed it. And that's one of the things that came out of this piece as well, is the casualness and the just kind of the everyday look of a native within video. When we think about imagery and natives within imagery, a lot of times it's very stoic, very kind of glamorized. And I wanted it to be very kind of like matter of fact, like this is who I am, this is what I'm doing. And I think that's important, because a lot of times we don't see just the casualness and the everydayness of wearing flip-flops or shorts and t-shirts and things like that, and with native people wearing those things necessarily when we think about art. And so I wanted to kind of go against that idea of having to get kind of glammed up and it kind of Indianized for the camera. So this, we'll watch just like a couple of little clips. And it's called Let's Dance, after David Bowie. I just wanna dance with you. I wanna dance with you. Twirl you all around the floor. Three car quick say shock. Hendo three. Hendo three. Gluing cuss. Endo three. Gluing cuss. Endo three. Endo three car quick say shock.
Dancing in the island, you be smiling from ear to ear. Let's make this clear, dear. Right in the veins. What's my philosophy? Many artists gotta learn. I'm not flammable. I don't.
So let's see. So kind of picking up on the narratives that I was talking about with the rocket ship, I created this, I have about suite of about 8 photographs, and they're stills of performances, pretty much, of me kind of interacting with my space in different ways and being covered in duct tape. I like the kind of metaphoric use of duct tape as always being the thing, the literal and metaphoric, of always holding things together, of holding people together, of holding families together in some way, of holding our homes together, cars or whatnot. But I also like the kind of that sheen that it has to it. That's kind of this futuristic kind of material. And so that's the next couple of images are from that series that are called the Legend series. And the tape is directly on my skin. That's a question that I tend to get a lot. So it was very exfoliating. When around the same time, I'm always thinking about Native imagery and about how natives are portrayed, like within, you know, art photographs, within print photographs, like in magazines and that type of thing, within film. And one thing I really started kind of thinking about was the connection to minimalist art. I was always interested in minimalist art and kind of intrigued by the simple nature of the lines and shapes that I was seeing. And I think it just kind of hit me how when we go to a powwow or different ceremonies, people's face, like Native people's faces, are painted in different ways. And how if we saw that on paper or canvas, like those same types of designs, they would be considered a minimalist art. And how you have these artists kind of painting themselves in different ways. And you might not even ever call them artists, but they're coming up with their designs or continuing designs that may have been handed down in their family. And so I became really intrigued in that. And so I decided I wanted to kind of capture that and make paintings. But what I realized as I was kind of going through getting ready to think about how I was going to kind of like to kind of pool different imagery, I realized that I didn't want to appropriate people's familial like face paint, that, you know, I'm not interested in doing something like that. And so I started thinking about where else that we see people with face paint on. And so I started thinking about Hollywood movies. And so I actually drew from two different movies that are kind of older movies now, Dances with Wolves and Last of the Mohicans. And so this is a group of paintings gouache on paper that are about a foot by a foot. And they're the face paint of different Native characters within Dances with Wolves. And so the funny thing is, you know, when you go to the credits to see who that person was, a lot of times they're not even attributed with a name. And so I think we have on the left is Pawnee number 1 and Pawnee number 4. And then the one on the far right is Wind in His Hair, who was one of the main characters. And then this is, these are from characters that were in Last of the Mohicans. And it was pretty much the same, like, you know, Huron number 2 and Huron number 5 and so on. And so the title of the paintings are after the characters they are. This is a piece that I did in New York at Socrates Sculpture Park. I received a fellowship there, I think around 2006. And I was interested in highlighting, you know, bringing people's kind of mind back to thinking about the origins of how Manhattan became a city, and the kind of questionable, but, you know, the story of how Manhattan was bought, or the land was bought from the Lenape Indians by the Dutch for $24 worth of trinkets. And so I asked 24 natives within the area of New York to buy something for me that was worth $24. I gave them $24. And so they did a lot of different things. Some people bought food pieces, some people bought stuffed animals, somebody bought cleaning supplies. It was like a lot of different things. And so the scaffolding, a lot of time you see that in different Native communities, and it's used a lot of times as almost like an altarpiece. And so the things that I was given were placed upon these pieces of scaffolding, and then they're at different heights to kind of mimic the skyline of Manhattan. So these are, you can kind of see it. And it was an outdoor sculpture that was up for about 6 months. So in this piece, you can see that somebody donated their entire amount to a homeless organization. And throughout the time that this was up, it was really interesting because it was a public, you know, park, and so open to the public. And so people came and were there for a lot of, you know, throughout most of the day. And over time, people started ripping the things off, even though they were encased in resin. They started ripping the sculpture down. And by the end of it, you saw things like this, which I thought was just absolutely like illustrating the entire idea of what I was trying to portray anyway. So while it seemed very reckless and awful in the end, it was just kind of rang true for the whole idea of the project. So, This is a sculpture installation, a full gallery installation that came out after kind of, I think in the late 2000s. And it was, it's called Clash of the Titans. And it was the first time that I had really, portrayed my Greek heritage in my artwork where it was visible. I'm very in touch with my Greek side, just as I am with my native side. I speak fluent Greek. And I had spent the summer in Greece that year. And while I was there, I read Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kostastakis. And I was really interested in the ideas in Zorba the Greek about how this idea of, major characters in the book that were meant to be realistic people had very mythic qualities to them and like almost like godlike qualities. And when people spoke about different relatives, they did the same thing, like how, somebody was like a giant that could tumble down a mountain or different things like that. And so I started thinking about how in family stories, we have those kinds of kind of jumps that we make, like how, somebody caught a fish and it was like this big. And the next time they tell the story, it was this big. And then it was like, 5 feet long or something. And so I started thinking about that and thinking about my own family history. And so this piece kind of came out of that kind of thinking in that book. And so it's a installation that's comprised of about 5,000 casts of different parts of the body and wall drawings and text and video.
So do you see commonalities between your Greek side and your Navajo side as far as like myths and history and things like that?
I think so. I think that there's a lot of the idea of kind of myth and stories plays a big part in both cultures, as well as sheep and goats. And I think this idea of just a family is so integral. I think, when I go, anywhere near my family land in the Southwest, like my family gets offended if I don't come and visit them, right? And it's like, well, why didn't you kind of, go out of your way for an hour and just come see us for a minute? And then the same thing in Greece. Like I've only been to a couple places in Greece because my family's adamant that I should be spending all of my time in Greece with them and not like, why would you go to Mykonos? We know it's pretty, but your family's not there. So it's just kind of funny to kind of think about that, that tight kind of like, relationship with family and connection that is expected. So, yeah. These are some photographs that are a series called Aesthetically Speaking. I felt like, I lived in Washington, D.C. for 12 years, and I became really interested in kind of how, and I think it happens for a lot of women, this idea that, we speak, but we're not necessarily heard. And how we see that a lot in politics, like within Indian country, and in DC, like with, different politics on the Hill. And so this came out of that. So all the women in the shoot were professional, people in downtown DC. They might be, librarians or attorneys or lobbyists. And so it was fun to kind of have them highlighted, but also kind of create these the digital drawings that went along with it. And it was nice because they were very professional. And so it was fun to see them kind of loosen up a little bit in a different way. So this is an installation I did at Mokna in the back in the sculpture garden. It was a really big outdoor installation made of old wood from my family's land in New Mexico. It's like from corrals and barns and, sheds and whatnot. And there's signage, aluminum signage that is posted throughout as you kind of walk around. It's a big spiral shape. And this was made in 2013. It's been shown probably about 8 or 10 different places throughout the US. And currently it's at the museum at Colorado College in a solo exhibition I have there that's up right now. And it's called Edges of the Ephemeral. I was commissioned to make this piece for a statewide celebration with a theme of time. And so we had to create some sort of piece that kind of dealt with the idea of time. And I decided to kind of think about and concentrate on the Navajo creation stories and the ideas of different worlds, like, are we in the fourth world? Are we in the fifth world? Are there worlds after this? Like, thinking about all those different questions. And this was the first time, because I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, I started using social media as a way to gather information and have people participate in my work. I was really interested in reaching out and kind of utilizing that. And so I used SurveyMonkey and created a little survey of like 5 or 6 questions and sent in the survey out to every Navajo I knew and asked them to forward on to anybody else that they could that was Navajo. And so I ended up getting around 60 responses. And from those responses, I kind of pulled different pieces of text and put them in the different signage within this. And so at the beginning, it's kind of negative, like a little bit more negative. And then it's as though you're kind of coming to terms with the possibility of, the end of the world, or there not being another world, or us ruining our world. And then it gets a little bit more positive towards the center. So that piece, Edges of the Ephemeral, was so successful and so fun to kind of reach out outside of my immediate community that I decided to do another kind of version of this. And this was a full gallery installation in downtown Washington, D.C. And for this piece, I sent a survey out to any native that had ever lived in DC or was currently living in DC, and asked them again, 5 or 6 questions about their experiences living there, and then put them up in the gallery. So the wall on the left is kind of the more negative, neutral, and then as it comes around to the right side, it's more positive. And so I think for me, like, even though it's the most simple kind of text, black on white, and it's all just standard letters, the idea of seeing text that speaks to you as like a native person, I find is so overwhelming to see it larger than life, I think was really exciting. And so I was really, I think the way that the Native community in DC connected to this piece was really important. And it was great just for other people to kind of experience this as well. And those are pieces, kind of bundles of wood from Rock Creek Park that are kind of spaced throughout. You can kind of see that. So this piece is really interesting, or I find it very fascinating. It's called She Made for Her. And it was a solo exhibition I had at the University of Chicago. It's completely made out of remnants of IKEA furniture that are from the As-Is section at IKEA. And so it's kind of this kind of manufactured wood that's not very strong or sturdy, but I wanted to kind of utilize it to create these different structures. And the title, She Made for Her, is actually a reference to a woman I came across in Washington, D.C. So my family and I when we would go often down to the National Museum of American Indian on the mall and, just kind of walk through the museum. It was a regular place that we would go to. And because the Native community isn't that huge in DC, we knew most people that work there. And we were walking through and I noticed that this woman was giving a tour to like a group of maybe 10 people. And the woman was visibly Native, but I didn't know her. And she wasn't wearing what most of the people wear in the museum. And I knew that she didn't work there. And so I started listening to her and I realized that she had no idea what she was talking about. And that she was just making stuff up and like pointing to things and like just coming up. And I was just fascinated. And so I actually, when her little tour was moving on to another room, I asked one of the people, I said, excuse me, do you know that, the information that you're getting is incorrect? And they kind of yelled at me and were like, you don't know, my friend's Native, they know everything in this museum, they know exactly what everything is. And I was just like, okay, that's fine. But I was struck by how confident and knowledgeable this woman was. And I was just very intrigued by this group that was following her. So, I couldn't stop thinking about her for a while. And I started thinking a lot about how we think of different objects and their utilization, and how even things that we may find, that are 500 years old, we have an idea of what we think they might be used for, but maybe that's not so, and maybe it was actually something completely different. And so I started to really think about kind of the idea of narratives of utilization in terms of objects and how we assign different things to that. And so I decided that I would create this whole show for her. And so these are objects that are meant to be kind of very open-ended, that kind of maybe speak to being for a specific use, but then could be for alternative things. And so again, utilizing social media, I asked Native women to look at the images and describe them to me. And so I had about 20 to 25 people respond. And so as you walk through the gallery, there are hidden speakers that are, and so like if you're sitting on the bench right there might be a speaker right by your ear, and there's somebody describing what you're seeing and what it's used for and the time of year that we use it, that type of thing. And so I was just really interested in those kind of the creation of narratives. And so it's kind of interesting to walk through and hear all those different things. And there are some that are in different languages, like Crow and Navajo, some of the descriptions. And so I still don't know who this woman is, and she probably does not know that there was a whole art exhibition dedicated to her. So this is another, these are pieces, just different shots in a different space of those same pieces from that show. And so when the use of the IKEA pieces was important to me, because when we were in the museum and looking at things, we were looking at kind of older, anthropological objects. And so when I was thinking about, okay, I'm a Native in DC, what are those materials that I would utilize to create objects around me? I thought IKEA, of course, that would be the material that I would scavenge to make my objects. A few years ago, a study came out from Seattle's Urban Indian Health Institute. I'm saying that right. And it was about the number of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And I think it struck a lot of people because, there are about 5,000, or what is it, 3,000 to 5,000 open cases and 500 over 500 confirmed cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And that was, a couple of years ago. So I don't know what the numbers are right now, but I wanted to do a piece in response to this issue. And I started thinking about the imagery of missing Native women, and how a lot of times the imagery is pulled, they're missing photographs on their posters are pulled off of social media, and how that really, the kind of the idea of selfie and the way that we portray ourselves like in different social media apps has become like our way of capturing portraits and kind of passing on portraiture and that type of thing. And so I decided to use selfies as the base of the project, and asked Native women, again, on social media and different places, to send me selfies to utilize in this project. And so I plan to do more iterations of this project, but the first iteration is of this video that I made of the portraits that I was sent. It uses about 100, and I have about 350 portraits right now. And all of the portraits are in the video, and they're different lengths of time that they pop up on the screen. So they might pop up for like 1 second or 5 seconds. And so I have a piece of paper up on the wall, and I have a big piece of graphite, and I try to draw their images the best I can, but then it switches. And so I'm never able to completely draw any of the women. And so this video is called Trace. And so this idea that no matter how hard, we're never going to capture like the image of these women again. So this is, let's see. And it also speaks to a drawing exercise that happens in a lot of kind of basic drawing classes called the Exquisite Corpse. So in that exercise, usually you'll have like pieces of paper lined up in a group of people, and everyone might work on one drawing for, a couple minutes, and then you switch and you start working on another drawing. And so by the end, everybody has worked on all the drawings. And so I've reversed that in this to where it's actually, the images are, revolving, but the drawings are kind of built up on one piece of paper. So I like that it kind of has that undertone as well, this idea of the exquisite corpse. And so let's see here. So this is one of the drawings, and the video is about 4.5 minutes long. And these are all the different drawings that kind of came out of this project. I tried, drawing all of the images like 8 times, and these were the pieces that came out of that.
And this was for only 100 images, or for all 300?
This is for 100.
Oh, for 100. Yeah. Wow. Interesting.
And so it's just kind of a different way of like thinking about portraiture and the idea of layering.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So now we're kind of jumping ahead to more recent work. Last year, I was the Artist-in-Residence at Colorado College for the academic year. And it was the first time I really had just tons of time to be able to go down different rabbit holes of interest that I might have had and never had time to pursue. And in my research in the fall there, I began reading a lot about Sol LeWitt and researching his work. I've always been interested in his work. And, I talked a little bit about my interest in kind of minimalist art before, but I learned kind of a lot more about him. And I started thinking also about terms that we utilize, like decolonization, like ideas, kind of those keywords that are kind of popping up within our society right now. And I decided that I wanted to try to figure out, like, if Western, one of the basic forms within Western art is considered like Sol LeWitt's work, which is kind of what you learn about kind of in an intro to sculpture class. And like his incomplete cubes are, a real reference to that idea of the basic kind of Western literal white sculpture. How could I decolonize that? What would that mean to decolonize Western art? And so I started thinking about the different ways that, one could do that. And I started, in order to think about decolonization, I feel like you have to think about the opposite of that, like indigenization. So how does one become indigenized, and how can one kind of like overtake the other? And so I started thinking about like what makes me Navajo? Like, what are the things in my daily life and the way that I was raised that are different than other people? And it made me think, and one of the things that kind of came to mind was the idea of binding, and about how, when we're babies, we're in cradle boards because, if we're not in cradle boards, the baby's arms are flying, and, they might hit themselves or scratch themselves, and they just don't have that control quite yet. And so they're bound in the cradle board. And once you start getting hair and it gets longer, you're taught to always keep it up, because that's the way that, your mind, it's a symbol of how your mind is. And so if you keep your hair all messy and crazy, that's how your thoughts are going to be. That's how your day is going to go. And so you want to keep it nice and clean and back. And, and then we use binding with, making medicine bundles and things like that. And there's so many different ways that I think binding pops up within our culture, that I became kind of conscious of. And so I decided that I wanted to kind of utilize that act to decolonize these pieces. And so being a performance artist, sometimes I find that working in performance first is kind of my sketch. I'm a little bit more free to kind of like figure things out and kind of make sure that I'm going the route that I want to. And so I decided to just use sinew and bind myself. And so this is an image from the very first performance I did. And then this is still from the second performance I did with IKEA pieces. And so I think, kind of skip through here a little bit. So I think this is about an 8-minute video where I'm trying to bind 12 IKEA pieces to my body, my head, and 12 because there are 12 sides to a cube. And so once I did those performances, I kind of had a clear idea of how I wanted to kind of visualize or kind of like create these sculptures that went along with it. And so these are IKEA pieces and plaster casts of my body that have black latex paint on them, and then pieces of wood with porcupine quills. So I'll just kind of go through a couple of those. And around the same time, I've always been interested in kind of utilizing text and kind of short thoughts, I guess, if you will, to kind of speak to different ideas. And I feel like a lot of the way I work is very minimal. Like, I'm not somebody who utilizes a lot of color or, has to get very frilly and like full of detail. Like, if I have an idea, sometimes I just want to put it out there. And so while I was at Colorado College, this is a photo of downtown Colorado Springs. I had these billboards of different kind of sayings. And so this was one, and then this was one as well. And so when I was thinking about like decolonizing sculptures or art, I was also, my studio was in the museum, and I started thinking about interactions of people within the museum and how, they aren't necessarily getting always what you want them to get. Like, if we were talking about museum education, like, you put something out there and you're hoping they're going to learn something from, whatever object or information you're putting out there. But maybe, I started thinking, like, what if we change the way that we're teaching them about things? And so I think these kind of come out directly of me being a teacher, and also being basically in, working in out of a museum for, several months. And so this is actually a teaching theory. It's called responsive classroom. And the idea that if it positive reinforcement for behavior. So like, if you see a kid running down the hall, but you see some walking, you'll be like talking to the kid that's walking and being like, I really love the way that you're walking down the hall, and being respectful. And so that kind of like positive reinforcement helps the rest of the kids learn what the good thing to do, the best way to get down a hall is. And so I decided that I would use these phrases that were kind of like positive reinforcement, put them out in the world and not assign my name to them, but just kind of have them being out there where people kind of came across them, and in literal hopes that maybe they'd say, wow, I really do that. Good job. I'm good, you know? And so, so they were out in billboards, and I also did a whole social media campaign of them. And so I have pages on Instagram and Facebook for that one Native artist. And there are 23 different phrases that I came up with. And so during the month of November, I would push them out as ads on social media. And so just like, you know, you could be anybody scrolling along, and then all of a sudden one of these might pop up in your feed, and you wouldn't know why it was there, and it wouldn't have any name assigned to it or like website or anything like that, but it would just kind of be something that was there. And I like that idea of using social media as a space, like an art space or a canvas in a way. And I love the idea of these just kind of interacting with people like in a very neutral way, but forced at the same time because it was forced into their life. And so I think the cool thing about doing these ad campaigns is you actually see how many people that have interacted with them, or like impressions that you've received from them. And so these reached about 35,000 people during the month, which was a lot of fun. And they're still up now if you look for them on Instagram or Facebook.
And do you still add to them?
I haven't added to them.
Oh.
I feel like I want to, but I think sometimes like that's one thing I've done and I need to move on to something else. And so I think my recent work is a direct response to some of these, like the stuff that I've been doing with the Mohicans residency. And this is a piece that was actually pretty old, but this summer I never had to use anymore. So this was a card that was, you know, directly influenced by Adrian Piper, an artist that used these calling cards back in the 70s. She would use them for, you know, people when she was in a bar or something. If somebody said a racist joke, she was biracial or is biracial. And instead of confronting the person, she would just simply hand them a card. And while I was living in DC, I, you know, was tired of seeing the Washington football team's logo everywhere we went, and people, you know, in the jerseys all the time. And so I came and I printed about 10,000 of these cards. And so they're just little business cards. And I would stick them in cars with bumper stickers, hand them to people like when we came across them, wearing gear like that. You know, we'd be at the pumpkin patch and there'd be somebody and I'd be like, oh gosh, then I'd have to hand them a card. But it was nice to like have another option besides like yelling at them. And like, and it was very non-confrontational, which was nice. But once the, and I've never told anybody about these and never promoted them or said that this was me, that I'm doing this or anything like this. And so when the Washington football team finally changed their name this summer, that's when I started sharing with people this project that I did that had been in the process for the past 10 years. And I think I found that it kind of worked well within the kind of scope of these different text works, because I've been working a lot with text. This was something that I made in kind of over the past few months. It's called Her Words Still Echo, and it was on at a gallery in Denver. But these were, so a lot of the text pieces I do are digital or like before billboards, and this was actually painting on paper. So it was just a new way of kind of experimenting with material. And because I am interested in that kind of like the sculptural quality of things sometimes. So trying to kind of think about drawing, but like give it a little bit more depth. And I am using color in this, which is very rare for me. Which brings us, I think, yeah, this is a project that I've done so far in the residency. And I think that when I think about the pieces that I did for the Native Guide Project, for all the Instagram pieces, I see these working in a very similar way. And so I realized as an artist, like, I don't need to have pieces that are meant to be like huge, big things out in the world all the time, but sometimes they can be just small thoughts that I'm putting out there. And that's what these 5 pieces kind of deal with, about, you know, where we are within kind of our thinking about people of color, you know, within our society in the United States, and, you know, the different definitions that have expanded or been, you know, redefined in the past year, and how people are making connections or, you know, revelations in, you know, in terms of cross-community contact. And I think that's it. So that brings us up to date.
Wow, that's really great. Thank you, Anna. I'm just like going through all of the images, and I'm like truly inspired. And like my creative juices are flowing. But it's really neat because you know, listening to your story, and you know, and kind of like getting understanding of your artistic identity, like it makes me and then also you know, saying that you're a performance artist, I'm also wondering if you see yourself as like a social change artist or a social practice artist as well.
I think I feel like those are terms that are newer.
Mhm.
And like, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said no.
Mhm.
But I think, you know, I think I've become that just by virtue of the work I'm interested in making.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, it's, I want to change people's thinking. I want to kind of get into these issues in different ways.
Mhm.
And so I think I don't do it like super direct. I mean, I do kind of with the billboards, those are kind of direct. But I don't but I don't really like think of myself as being like running down the streets like, oh, you know.
Mhm.
But yes, I do think of my work as you know, looking, you know, working in those arenas of like social change.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. And you touch on a lot of different, like everything from, you know, mascots, and then looking more, you know, into just even these words that are commonly used, you know, within social media, within, you know, different groups of like land back or sovereignty, or even what those words mean. Are there any other Are there other issues, current issues that you wish to speak to through any of your, you know, future work?
I think, I mean, I'm definitely going to be circling back to the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls movement. I think, you know, I think I kind of hop around sometimes because there's so many different issues that you want to bring people attention to or kind of explore more in depth. But I have an upcoming show at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C.
Mhm.
And so for that project, I'm hoping to work with like different families to get copies of actual missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls,
Mhm.
to get copies of their portraits. So I can do a performance piece in the National Portrait Gallery where I'm putting those up and I'm going to make like stanchions to put those portraits on and then place those throughout the galleries, like next to presidents and things like that.
Mhm.
Because I think when I, you know, received the opportunity to do, you know, performance pieces in the National Portrait Gallery, you know, it was like, it's really like intimidating and daunting to think, what can I do here and utilize this space and my time within this space to the best of my ability. And like, for me, it's not about like putting my name somewhere, but bringing, like, using myself as a platform to kind of push issues up. And when I thought about the idea of like what the National Portrait Gallery is and the whole idea of portraiture, like that seemed like the perfect kind of connection to make.
Mhm.
Because when we think about missing women and girls, like even specifically Native, like we think of their imagery on posters or in like, you know, people's Facebook posts or things like that. And we don't think about how we should be revering those portraits and really like thinking about the lives that could have been, should have been, would have been, you know. And I think when we go to some place like the National Portrait Gallery, that's what we're always thinking about is like, oh my gosh, what are the contributions this person made? And like, why are they here? And like, there's innate importance and reverie that's placed on those portraits.
Mhm.
So I want Native women and girls to have that same thing.
Mhm.
I want to bring that to them and give them that space.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's absolutely powerful and needed for sure. I mean, I always wanted to do a writing project that shared the stories of all of these, all of our missing, murdered Indigenous women, girls, trans, and two-spirit relatives. And say like they had, they had stories. They were actual people and not just statistics.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
that's powerful for sure.
Mhm.
Definitely. I had a question about the two installations that you did, the one that was at Mokna and then also the one that was done in DC, where you had a survey that was shared. What were some of the questions or that you asked within those?
I mean, they were pretty basic and short because I didn't want them to be time consuming.
Mhm.
I wanted them to be something that somebody could do in like 3 to 5 minutes. And
Mhm.
so, you know, I think one of the questions for the Mokna one was, you know, how many how many worlds do you believe Navajos have lived through? Do you believe there's another world coming? Like,
Mhm.
what do you think our favorite world was? You
Mhm.
know, all of these kind of basic ideas and like, and also asking like where they were from, because I was really interested in that time, which I'm still, you know, curious about, is like how sometimes our stories are a little bit different and like our kind of like little morals or, you know, taboos that we have within Navajo land, like how they're different on the Western side than they are on the Eastern side.
Mhm.
So I like kind of thinking about those things too, but I mean, I don't know, that was just my own interest.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that was really cool. I mean, the researcher in me was like, oh, that's really neat to think about just throwing out a survey,
Yeah.
and seeing all the
I
responses that come out of it.
I did another version of it in Jackson Hole, and it was when the eclipse was happening in like 2017 maybe, or
Mhm.
2018, whenever that big eclipse was. And so it was a survey out to any natives that I sent, asking people about kind of their traditional beliefs about eclipses and like just celestial events in general.
Oh, wow.
So that was really cool too, to kind of
Wow.
hear everybody's responses.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Um, the other question I had was more so of like memorable responses. Like what sort of memorable responses have you received from people that just, come across your work or who have like seen it?
Oh, I thought you meant like in the survey.
Oh no. I
I was
mean, just
gonna-
like in general, of like people that view your work at like a museum or, or in a gallery or just when you're performing.
So I would say the most memorable responses were kind of early on, and it was what I had. So the show, I was in a show called Remix that traveled, and it was a group show of different artists from kind of all over, and it was at I think at NMAI, and then it was at where was that? The Heard Museum and the Art Gallery of Ontario, the AGAO in Toronto. And my piece in that show is the Let's Dance piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that when it was showing, a family member of mine was like walking through the museum, and they were hearing a tour of somebody talk about my work. And I still know, I know it's changing now, but this was, almost close to 20 years ago now, that there weren't tons of, Native artists working in video or, performance, like in those different genres. And so during that tour, this tour guide said, this is Anna, Tsouhlarakis's work, and this is for video. She works in video because she doesn't know anything about where she's from or her, traditional teachings.
Wow.
And I was like, and my family member was like, what? Like, and so they immediately called me and like told me about this. And I was shocked. But I mean, I guess but I was like, at the same time, I was like, well, if somebody doesn't know my work, maybe those are the assumptions that are going to be made.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was really surprising, but like, it always, kind of like, I don't know, it kind of frustrates me when people think that you have to be this or that, like you can't be both.
Mm-hmm.
And like, we're Native people and we can be complex and complicated. Like, we don't have to be just one way.
Mm-hmm.
I always think about like even the things, that I am like, in terms of, my, like when I describe myself as being Native American and Greek, like, matrilineal and Greek is patrilineal. And like, so in my cultural way, I am fully both things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I never try to say I'm one or the other. Like, to me, I'm both. And so I don't know, like I hear that a lot, like, and I hear a lot like, oh, the art you make isn't Native.
Mm-hmm.
Because of this, that, and the other. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, I can know about where I come from and decide to do this.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
Wow. Well, since we're getting to an hour, I have one more question for you. The question I have is, what are some of the most significant things that you have learned as an artist, or even through your art making?
I think kind of what I was talking about, like the most significant thing I can think of is that I don't have to use my voice. Like, just because I'm the artist, it doesn't always have to be my voice that's getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I like the idea of using like SurveyMonkey or social media, is that I'm not like, I'm able to bring people in to kind of add to the piece and to kind of create community. And like, I wouldn't necessarily say my work is community art, but it definitely is utilizing the community as a material, both culturally and like in terms of voice. And I think for me, like, if I'm able to do that in different ways, like that's just awesome. I'm becoming kind of like an amplifier for whatever needs to be said.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that idea that that it doesn't have to be about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes artists feel like it always has to be, and that's the way some people work, but I like the idea of being this platform, like I said, to hold people up and so people can hear what they have to say. Like, even my Instagram pieces, and my friends are used to this kind of stuff now, but like those Instagram pieces, I had come up with maybe 10 of them, and I sent them to some of my friends who I know are pretty witty and clever.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, sent me back, different ones as well. And so, and I think it's exciting for them knowing like, oh yeah, I wrote that one, and like I did this. And then when I do like the SurveyMonkey ones, like I can, even though they're anonymous, like people don't tell me, who they are necessarily, and there's no place to put your name. Like, I can hear twangs or like dialect in their voice. I'm like, you're from North Carolina. Somebody from North Carolina wrote this. Or they use different keywords that kind of key you in that they're from like, I don't know, Seattle or something.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing that I've learned.
And that's great. I mean, I think that's the greatest way of ending this too, because with the social engagement residency, that's what it is, and that's what it should be about, about sharing space, about amplifying not only Indigenous voices, but voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color, for sure, you know, and that's exactly, you know, what you're doing, you know, that's phenomenal. And I love that. You're so inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
no, and thank you for having me at the residency. It's been a lot of fun, and it's good to like a perfect time to kind of renew like the direction that I'm trying to go and like trying to do, you know, how I like to work. So
Mhm. That's great. It's great to hear. But yeah, but thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for sharing space with us, you know, and sharing your story with us. We truly appreciate it. Definitely check out both social engagement artists. Check out the virtual studios at mochnaresidency.squarespace.com. And Anna is also doing Instagram takeover as well on the day that this will be aired, which is Wednesday. So definitely check out our Instagram as well at IAIA Mochna. Thank you again, Anna, and then also thank you everyone for taking part in our public programming.
thank you.